so I took issue with that. You know, if you just look at those numbers and those individuals that were being convicted for crimes that they did commit, you would think that a person, based upon what they look like, their race, they were just bad people. But I tended to think differently. I thought that maybe there's something wrong with the system, and the fact that a person is African American or Hispanic or whatever means nothing as it relates to that individual committing a crime. Maybe it's a structure of our system which made it easier for those individuals to find themselves within the criminal justice system. So you would have to imagine that when I got elected, those traditional law enforcement individuals took issue with the stance that I had taken in running for office, and then after I was elected, you would have to imagine how difficult that was for those law enforcement individuals to accept the fact that I had become the chief law enforcement officer within Dallas County. So it was a very difficult transition. But I was fortunate enough to have some individuals that came with me that understood that philosophy, and they, had the backbone and skill that would help me implement that philosophical approach. Now, when we first got there, the manual that he talked about, the Sparling Memo, was true. Up until 1986, there was a policy within Dallas County that you didn't put certain individuals on juries. And that's how the prosecutors were trained, unfortunately. And as a result of that, there was an issue of credibility as it related to the DA's office. And not just the DA's office, but with the police department in certain parts of Dallas. And I would imagine that it's the same here and throughout the country. There were certain groups of individuals that were very uncomfortable with law enforcement. They were justified with that response because law enforcement did not work for them. They would not call the police when a crime was committed because they didn't feel comfortable with the police. And as a result of that, you had this whole subculture that was created. And those of you who are in law enforcement, you've probably heard of the term of no snitching. And why do you have individuals who witness crimes and maybe victims themselves not wanting to participate in the process and bringing law enforcement in? It was because law enforcement didn't work for those individuals. And so when we got into office, our first and one of our main goals was to bring credibility to the system, to make law enforcement work for everyone. And that was a difficult proposition for those traditional law enforcement individuals because they thought that here he comes, this liberal, democratic, African-American DA coming in. He's going to let all these folks that commit crimes out of jail. But what they didn't understand is that that was not our approach. Our approach was to bring credibility to the system, to make law enforcement work for everyone. And so we instantly saw a problem. The fact that we had all these individuals claiming that they didn't commit a crime. And those claims had fallen on deaf ear for years. And so we instituted a program called the Conviction Integrity Unit, which specifically went and looked at these claims of innocence and reinvestigated the cases. Now, when I took office in 2007, Dallas County had the dubious distinction of having at least 6 individuals before I took office proven not to have committed crimes. And this goes all the way back, to the 70s. There were about 6 individuals. And in 2001, the state of Texas passed this statute, this post-conviction DNA statute, which allowed an individual who had a legitimate claim of innocence to have their DNA tested if it was still available. And in Dallas County, we were fortunate enough over years and years and years to keep that evidence. We still have it. And so we looked at certain cases. We started to look specifically at those cases that were denied a DNA test. There were about 400 we looked at those cases. That was a pool of cases that we started looking at. And to date, from 2007 until today, it's actually 23 exonerations that we've had. And to me, that was an issue of credibility. That meant that the system was not working. We had 23 individuals convicted for crimes they didn't commit. And this is the part of the story that is not widely shared with the media, is the fact that in a lot of those cases, we found out who actually committed the crime. And unfortunately, people that actually committed the crime that were not convicted and didn't go to prison, those folks that went to prison for them served all that time. But the other side of it is that those individuals that should have been convicted, that weren't, continued to commit crimes after that individual, or those individuals were convicted for something they didn't do. And so, traditional law enforcement, I had a question for them. You're there to protect and serve. And when you convict someone that didn't commit the crime, you have given cover to the real criminals. And in some cases, and this is the truth, in one particular case, we exonerated an individual on Friday, and the person that actually committed the crime, we brought him before the grand jury. He admitted to it. We had the wrongfully convicted individual take lie detector test after lie detector test. And that individual was exonerated on Friday for a crime that he didn't commit. It was a sexual assault. But unfortunately, the person that did commit it, he was in prison for another crime that happened after the crime that the person was wrongfully convicted for. He got out of jail on Monday. And we could not prosecute him because of this thing called the statute of limitations. Law enforcement, to a certain extent, has failed. And it takes individuals and groups like this to challenge it. I heard the officer come up here and say that, change is very difficult because you're dealing with the unknown, and he is absolutely right. It is very difficult. But what we were able to do as a result of implementing these policies, living up to the Code of Criminal Procedure, and I understand that there are some folks here in Travis County that are running for judge, and I want to take you back to the 80s. Do you recall individuals campaigning on this idea of being tough on crime? That was their campaign slogan. Some people still use it. And there are individuals that sit on the highest court in Texas and the appeals court, the highest criminal court in Texas, that campaign on the fact that they are pro-prosecution. Now, I take issue with that because a judge shouldn't be pro-anything. He should be pro-justice. And for the life of me, I'm still trying to figure out how we allow this citizens in this state to get so bad, where there's an issue of credibility in the state of Texas